Okay, so when we will use triggers, or like what are our triggers was Apex triggers. When a trigger will fire.
Trigger will fire whenever some event happens.
Okay, and what we can do with the trigger.
Whenever we want to perform something like synchronously,
Yeah, triggers will be fired whenever a record changes are happen. The record changes means any kind of DML operations. The DML operations are, it could be insert, update, delete, undelete. Any kind of DML operation it performs. You want to do some automated logic in the backend, then we'll go for a triggers. So when I'm saying automated logic, it could be doing some actions, like updating some fields or creating a records or deleting a records. Any kind of Apex logic that we can run when any kind of a DML is happened. And along with this, we have a upset, right? Upset is nothing but either insert or update. It's not a um, different DML. It could be either insert or update. So when you do upset also, a trigger will be fired, but in upset, there is a possibility of either insert or update. If insert is happened, it will go into a insert event. If update is happened, it go into a update events. And we have a convert, we have merge, we have here also. What will happen in convert? In convert, it will insert new records. The new records could be account, contact, opportunity. So we're not directly doing an insert, but when we're doing a convert, there's a possibility of creation of 3 records. So triggers belongs to those objects on an insert event will fire. Similarly, merge. What will happen in the merge? Merge will be happen with the update and a delete. So the duplicate records will get deleted and the master records will get updated with the child records. So all the child records will be updated with the master record. So there will be update happen to the all related records to the duplicate records. Okay, so even though the operations are, we don't have events directly, but those operations will trigger the direct DML operation called insert, update, delete, or undelete. So in short, we're having a total 4 kinds of a DML operation. Out of this 4 kind of a DML operation, we have events of before and after events. So except delete, we have all before and after uh, events for a insert, update, and undelete. and delete will have only before. Okay. Now we have seen all possible events and what are the context variables that are read only or read and editable, or there will be a no possible values. And what we can do with the trigger. So we have seen we can add error messages. Like if somebody asks you how you can stop a record from creation or update, what are the different ways of adding a error message and stop the save of a record? One is a page level. You can make some of them are required fields. So if those fields are not filled in, then it will give an error message. And second one, you can give a field level required fields, so that if they are not required, sorry, if they are not filled, then the save is not allowed. And then we have a validation rules. So whenever your validation rule is true, then you will be, or you can show a error message at the record level or at the field level saying so and so message we are not allowed to save. And what else? How we can add custom error messages through a triggers in all the events like insert, update, delete, and delete. In all the events, we can add the error messages after checking a certain conditions. So these are all the possible ways of adding error messages and stop record from a save. Okay, so far clear. Here we have all four events. Here we have a three. Now, what we'll do is, other than this, in triggers, we can do all this. We can send emails, we can call Apex classes, we can call batch jobs, we can call schedule jobs, we can call future methods, we can call callouts from a triggers. So how we can do that? We can see. And before getting started with those, I'd like to mention what are the best practices to follow while using a triggers. Best practices while writing triggers. So before actually we're talking about the best practices, we should know about a governor limits. Then only we can understand better about the best practices. So I will go through some of the governor limits by the Salesforce. So if you remember, all the governor limits are per transaction. I told what is a transaction means. If you do a save, whatever will happen in the back end till that save is committed to the database is called a transaction. Now, I guess most of them we covered the topics, so we can now look at the limits. Okay, total number of SOQL queries. What does it mean? we write the queries, right? Select ID or like aggregate queries or child to parent or parent to child queries, count queries. All this will be considered as a SOQLs only. So those kind of queries we can write up to 100 per transaction. Whereas asynchronous, we can write 200. Can you state some of the examples of the asynchronous Apex? What are the asynchronous Apex?
scheduling jobs,
Okay, schedule Apex, and then batch Apex,
batch future,
future,
queuing.
queuable, all these four. So all these four, we can do a 200 SOQL queries. But normal Apex, like Apex class, like when you're calling from a visual force page or any lightning components or from triggers, when you do, you can do only maximum of 100 SOQL queries. Triggers are asynchronous. Okay. Number of records retrieved from a SOQL queries. It could be synchronous or asynchronous. Max we can do was a 50,000 only using a SOQL queries. It is per transaction. If you're using only one single query, it will be 50,000. If you're using a multiple SOQL queries in your transaction, the second and third and fourth and last SOQL query will be keep on reducing whatever the left rows. Let's say you have four queries and first query returns the 10,000 rows. So second query will have a limit of 40,000 only and it use 5,000, and third query will have only 35,000. So it will go keep on goes like that. What is the max number of rows that you can query from a SOQL query is asked? Then it is a 50,000 per transaction, or if you say per query also it is 50,000. Clear? And what is the database.get query locator? Where we use this database.get query locator? You can all keep yourself unmute and you can add your points. Where we have seen the database.get query locator be used somewhere,
When we wrote a batch,
right? When we are writing a batch class, we use this database.get query locator. In the start method, we use database.get query locator, and in brackets in a string form we'll pass the query, and the return type of the start method is a database.query locator, and there the limit is 10,000. So if you use directly in Apex method, we have a database dot query, right? If you use like that, the limit is a 50,000. If you use a dot get query locator, it will be of 10,000 in a normal Apex. Whereas in a batch job, so this is a limit for a single batch. So max batch size is going to be a 10,000 for you. Okay. And in the aggregate, how many rows we can execute using a batch Apex is 50 million rows when we're using with the database.get query locator with the combination. SOSL queries. So this was what we're about to cover. Maybe on Monday or Tuesday, we're going to cover SOSL. This is called a Salesforce Object Search Language. SOQL is a Salesforce Object Query Languages. This is a search languages. Query means directly we'll get a data from a database. So without, if you have any where conditions, it will filter with those data and return. Whereas the search queries, it can search on a multiple records. It could be on single record or it could be on multiple records. It could be on related and unrelated or standard or custom objects. It could be any combination. At a time, you can fetch a more than one object or one object also. You can do a search. So we do deeper into this SOSL, but per transaction, we can perform a SOSL of 20 SOSLs we can use. When there is no value in the synchronous, it is same for a synchronous and asynchronous epochs. Okay. Total number that can be retrieved from a SOSL is a 2000 per transaction. And total number of DML statement issued. So what is a DML statement? It could be any of this. Any of this can be treated as a DML statement only. Something database dot recycle bin empty or something. There are some statements for a recycle bin also. They are also considered as a DML statement only. All these are considered as a DML statements, and you can use of 150 statements per transaction. It could be synchronous or asynchronous. Total number of records that can be processed in a DML statement. Yeah, we have this one, right? Approval process or a database.empty recycle bin. All this will be considered as a DML statements only. How many records that are affected with your DML statements can be max 10,000. This is also similar to 50,000. If you have only one single DML statement, you can update or insert or delete up to 10,000 records. If you have multiple DML statements, if your first statement is using 5,000 records, further DML statements will have only 5,000 is a limit. If second statement is used 4,000, from third DML statement onwards, you will be left with only 1,000 rows. Okay, this is per a transaction, not per single. And if you have a single, if you consider as a max number of rows that can be performed in a DML statement is a 10,000. Max means if you have only one DML statement. Total stack depth of any Apex invocation that recursively fires triggers due to insert, update, delete statements is a 16. So when we are saying recursive trigger, it will not immediately stop saying that it is recursive. It will go depth of 16 times. That means, let's say first time you modified some record and a update trigger has fired, and again you updated. So what will happen? Again it will start firing a triggers. So in somewhere you have one more logic in your trigger, so that is fired. Again that is made delete or insert. Again it will fire insert or a delete triggers. Again in the triggers you have some other. Like that it does recursively for 16 times. If it is going more than 16 times, it will be considered as a recursive and it will throw exception and stop a transaction with a failure. So you have to make sure that it is not recursiving more than 16 times, then it will be a exception. Okay. Total number of callouts in a transaction. You can do up to 100 callouts per transaction, and maximum cumulative timeout for callouts is a 120 seconds in a HTTP callouts. And max, so once you do a one call out, so what you're doing, you are sending some request to the external system, and the external system has to receive that request and it has to respond with some response to a request. So it will take some time. So the maximum allowed time for that is a 120 seconds. So maximum number of methods of future allowed per Apex invocation is 50. If it is asynchronous, like a batch and future context, it is 0. Why? Because we cannot call a future method from a, again, asynchronous. Asynchronous means like a batch, future, and a queuable, schedulable only, right? So if it is a batch, we cannot call. The limit is 0. If it is already future, you cannot call a future. That is a 0. And if it is a queuable, you can call a future only one time. Okay, that is what that limit says. And maximum number of Apex jobs added to a queue. So we have this queuable jobs, right? So you can enqueue up to, you can queue up to 50 queuable jobs. We can run the system.enqueue job 50 times in a transaction. If it is already you have enqueued the job, you can do one more time. That's it. So you can go up to only one level. Sorry, in a queuable jobs. So if in short you say a future or a queuable jobs, both are same. You can do up to 50 jobs. Sorry, you can call a 50 future methods or you can enqueue 50 queuable jobs. But inside another queuable, you can do up to only one, but you cannot call a future and batch methods in the future. But while as an enqueue method, you can do call. Okay. And total number of send email methods allowed. This is what we're going to discuss today. Sending emails from Apex. So we can send up to 10 times. We can call the send email method per transaction. So when you do a send a email, we can send emails from a Apex code. So we will see today how to send emails from Apex. Okay, total heap size. So what is the heap size was? So when we are executing any of the Apex code, so what we do, we'll be having a variables and we do query the records from a database. And what else we do? We'll in if it is a Visual Force pages, we do have a forms and we enter data into it. We sometimes upload files. We'll be having all types of this. So when we are executing this piece of Apex, so it temporarily holds some data, right? So all these lines of code, sometimes we enter the data from manually, sometimes we query the data from a databases. So it has to hold that information in the variables. It could be any type of variables. You having that kind of all this data will be stored temporarily. All this data size, what we call it as a heap size. What is a size of data that Apex code is handling is called a heap size. With heap size, we can go up to 6 MB in a synchronous calls. In asynchronous calls, we can go up to a 12 MB. Maximum CPU time of a Salesforce servers. We can use a 10,000 milliseconds. That is a 10 seconds. So if you are writing a query, so it can take maximum of 10 seconds only. If it is exceeding 10 seconds, you will get a CPU time limit exception. So not only for a query, it is for a transaction. Once you start a transaction, the CPU time will be at 10 seconds. If it is not completing within 10 seconds, then you will get a CPU time exception. And this will be 60 seconds for a asynchronous. Sorry, this is for only for CPU time. When we are using utilizing servers, Apex servers, and this is what the response from the servers, like any kind of queries or any requests you do to the database, all this DMLs or SOQL queries, which are all deal with the database and which will consume a CPU timing. That will be taken as 10 seconds, but overall transaction time will be of a 10 seconds. What you can perform for a Apex transaction will be maximum number of push notification calls are allowed for a Apex transaction. So you can do a 10 push transactions or push notifications you do, and maximum can be sent each push notification call method. So this is for each push. You can do kind of a 10 pushes. For each push, you can do up to a 2000 notifications you can do. And this is a event based and publish. This concept is a different one. So we have a platform events, and this platform events we can do publish from a Apex code also. You can do up to 150 platform events you can fire. So what it called as a event based publish. These are all a high level or what are all the governor limits that can be encountered in a while executing a Apex code. You have any questions you have? So here we have what are all considered as SOQLs, what are all considered as the DML statements. We have given some examples over here. Do you have any questions before we continue with the other?
No questions. Okay, below we have some limits. Um, the maximum amount of code used in an Apex code in an arc. So we are writing Apex classes, Apex triggers, and all right. So when we are writing all these classes, it will occupy some memory, right? So that memory, the max that we can use per an arc is a 6 MB. So where we can see that was. So I can see percentage of Apex use was 0.84 percentage. So max going to use was these characters. 6 MB will give a 6 million characters. So far we have used 50,520 characters of Apex code. So which will not include any kind of test classes or commands we used in Apex. Those are all will be not considered. Only the executable pixel lines of code only will be considered here, and you can
use up to 6 MB of Apex code you can write for an organization. And these are not a strict limits. You can, like, if you have more code in your arc, you can Salesforce to increase this limit. So max number of characters per a trigger was a 1 million. Max number of characters for a class is a 1 million. These are the apex limits. So in a single class, so it's almost like the total size is a 6 million. Here 6 MB means it's giving a 6 million. So in a single trigger, you cannot use more than 1 million lines of code. Similarly, one single class should not have a more than 1 million number of characters.